All right, welcome back to the Legacymakers podcast. We are doing a showing up series where we're looking at what it looks like to show up in the home with our spouses, with our kids, and all these different areas. So today we're talking about showing up when your spouse is struggling spiritually.
Here we go.
Now, no matter how strong we are spiritually, we all go through these moments of distance and disconnect with God, and so I think this is a super applicable topic because we're all going to experience those moments at different times, and so we want to look at how do we show up when we are the ones struggling, but also for our spouse when they're in that season.
Yeah.
And because I think a lot of times when someone is in that season, there can be a lot of judgment or bitterness towards the way that they're acting, or on the person's side, more shame that usually we're aware that we're not showing up and with our family spiritually or in our relationship with God, we know we're distant. And so something that I have learned in our processes of doing this is really the greatest tool for this is prayer. Like I have had the times of trying to suggest, like, maybe you should do these things. They're like, oh, I've really been doing this. Maybe you'd like to do that. Or, or criticizing too. Like I can definitely lean towards being critical and making little comments about a lack or something that I would wish to see. But none of those things are ever fruitful. And,
Nope.
I know.
Yeah, I've really learned that the best thing to do when my spouse is struggling is just to pray, and just to bring those desires and longing of our heart of what they could step into with God to prayer and bringing that to God, because that's where the change comes. And it's a heart issue, right? When there's a distance, it's a commitment and a heart issue. It's not like a lack of discipline or something. There's something that is going on that is creating that spiritual struggle with them. And so anything that I suggest isn't going to work, right? There has to be a change of the heart, and that only comes through the Holy Spirit.
That's good.
Yeah, it's so good. How do you notice when that's happening? Like, what are the things that for anybody, that you might tend to pick up on that is like making you think, I wonder if he's maybe struggling with God or struggling with his relationship with God, or how he's doing with that, and what does it look like?
Okay, not to throw you under the bus, honey.
Please do.
That's why we're here.
when Aaron, Aaron, if he is, it's so interesting because the distance, when we're talking about struggling and this, distance that we feel between us and God, or our spouse and God, like the distance is only on our end. It's never on God's, right? God is never distant from us. He paid the price. Amen. And he is with us always.
Thank the Lord.
It's a issue of, is my heart turned toward him?
Wow.
Am I engaged in relationship with him? Am I showing up, right, with him when he wants to meet with me, and during the day and all throughout the night and whatnot, right? So it's never an issue on his part. But one thing I've noticed with you, hun, is if Aaron's, he's just allowing the busyness of life to come over him, and he is not prioritizing time being tucked away with God like Jesus always did. He always went away to be with the Lord. But when Aaron's not doing that, he tends to become more critical, and he tends to become more harsh in his language toward others. And honestly, what I think it is he's feeling it toward himself. He's feeling that criticism. Would you agree, Hen? And you can speak to he's feeling it toward himself, and so he's projecting it on others of like, oh, that was sloppy, or oh, that person, what are you doing cutting me off? Whatever it is, there's just this more like quick to be critical, and less when Aaron is spending time tucked away with the Father and he is engaged in relationship with God. Aaron's patient. He is kind. He's full of love and grace, and like isn't in a hurry. And so it's an interesting difference I see in just what you've gone through over the years and whatnot. Yeah. What else? What else do you guys have you seen in your? You can divulge on me too, honey.
Well, also too, it's like
this is fun. What do you see in me?
That's a good question. I don't see a lot.
Distant. Her heart's always.
I mean, I definitely I have it in my mind a lot. Man, I really want, because I feel like you, out of anybody, you have the least amount of time like that. It looks like what you're spending with God, but I know that's not true, because I feel like you have a very like close relationship with him day in and day out, just throughout the day. And it's super special what you have Meg, with God. But actually, I was going to ask a question about, how do you stay in it? Like you said, prayer, like you go to prayer when, you're suggesting things, but it's not going to work. But how do you like stay in it with your spouse? You show up with your spouse, alongside your spouse in their struggle, in their, their challenge, their turmoil, their wrestling, without, like you're saying, without criticizing, without maybe over suggesting or over recommending, using your words and just kind of, going on and
so
on.
Much of like, it's not just that you pray for them when you are feeling irritated, right? It's that attitude of like entrusting their spiritual journey to God. Like if we're trusting their spiritual life to God, that it's not something that we can control or create, then we fill those gaps with so much more grace. I feel like it's like if they are not, maybe they're not leading the family in the way that we would want spiritually. Well, okay, then we just step in and we do it. Like, I think doing that without begrudging having to fill that gap, right? I think is huge.
Yes. I heard a fascinating quote. I'm not going to say it all right, or I don't remember who it was. Sorry, guys. But it's this idea of...
Someone once said.
Someone once said, if you remove time from the equation, there will be no more anxiety or no more, no more begrudging, no more this or that, whatever the things we experience, because we want to see our spouse do this. We want them spiritually well with God and leaning into, wholeheartedness with Him, because the kids need it, and I need it, and our family needs it, and this, and this. And if it doesn't happen, the fears start creeping in of, well, then my kids won't love God, or, whatever we might be processing and whatever fears might be on the other end. But if we remove time or our expectation of it should look like this at this time, and we entrust, like you said, to God, your timing is always sufficient, Lord. And whenever He does turn His heart towards you, or she turns her heart towards you, like, you will give back to us whatever the enemy stole in that time that they weren't pursuing you. I know that's something that you and I have talked about, recently. We've made some big life changes and whatnot, and Aaron's wondered, like, oh man, did I waste time, or was time wasted, or, this concept of time. And, if I wasn't present leading my kids in this capacity, did I lose out, or did I miss out? And when we sit back on, but God's bigger and He's better, and He'll take the little time we do have, and He'll do way more with that than the time that we, thought we could have had it looked the way we wanted it to all along.
Yeah. So good. I kind of want to dovetail this with, as we're kind of discussing and processing what it looks like to show up when your spouse is struggling spiritually, just kind of dovetail it with, like, how can we show up spiritually for our family, and how can we show up spiritually for our home, and for our kids and whatnot? What does it look like to lead our home spiritually? Maybe when our spouse isn't doing it, but also just generally speaking, like, what are some ways that we can really lead our family, like pastor our family? My mentor used to say, you're the pastor, the priest, and the prophet of your home. And you are God, speaking about the men specifically. But in general, how can we lead our family spiritually to, a closer, deepening relationship with God?
It's a great question.
Right. It is a good question. I've thought about this, and a conversation that Natalie and I have had in the past to prevent something like this from happening. For me personally, because I know I have a tendency to get lethargic spiritually when I'm too busy. And there's probably a lot of people listening to this podcast and saying, "Yep, that's me. I do that." I pull away from Him, and I dive deeper into my work, or whatever else I'm working on, and I sense that I'm less patient. Maybe I'm more critical. I'm things I don't want. I'm less like Him. Obviously, because if we're not beholding Him, we're not becoming like Him. So the goal is to get in front of His face as much as we can.
So good.
But I've told Natalie, I have given her permission to say, "Hey, hun, you're not doing this or you're not doing that, or to tell me like, spiritually, you're not on track. Like I've told her to speak sternly to me. I said, you can do that. Yeah. You can do that. And I understand that there may be some relationships out there where it's like maybe the wife is like, ooh, I don't want to call my husband out because he may pull away further. Maybe. Yeah. I mean, that's the reality.
Yeah.
But I've noticed that I have a tendency to do those things. So I've given Natalie permission to do that.
Right.
And then, I'm thinking about as a husband and a father, recently, I was reading in the Old Testament when Aaron's ordained as the priest, and his sons are too, and it's their job to keep the incense burning.
Yeah.
And I was really impacted by that. And it had been a long time since I've read that, but it's like, man, it is my job. That's so good. And it may not be mornings for you, but for me, it's my job to get up in the morning before everyone else is. Yeah. And I keep the incense burning. I keep the fire lit, and I'm praying for our family and our kids, and I'm setting up those spiritual walls, and I'm mentioning them in prayer and thanking them. And that is something I get to do. Like that was Aaron's privilege and his descendants. That's their privilege to do. Like the Lord is theirs. He's their share and their allotment. And I'm thinking like, man, this is something I get to do on behalf of my family. Like I'm excited to get up and do these things because no one else is going to do them for me.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
No one else is going to do it.
Yeah.
I get to do it.
That's good.
And if I don't do it, then no one's putting in that time in prayer. No one's backing my kids in hours of prayer before they reach the age of majority and they start making real life decisions for themselves.
Yeah.
I want to know that I've put in the time and the effort in prayer. Like I've sat at the throne and I've said, let them make good decisions, Lord.
Yeah.
Prepare them for the hardships of life. I want them to love you every single day of their lives. Give them spiritual wisdom, knowledge, understanding of your love, all those good things. So that's something I'm thinking about when showing up spiritually.
Did it hit extra close because his name was Aaron?
Extra close.
Of course.
Right.
Extra close. We're talking to Aaron right now.
So true.
The Lord knew you needed that one.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Can I make it more plain, Aaron?
Aaron,
I would like piggyback on that too, and just something Ben has done is like I don't know if this is why you've done it. Actually, you've never told me why you've done it, but there have been moments in our life together where he has been like, Megan, I set aside this day and it is for you to go be alone with God.
Amen.
Come on.
Yes.
He knows, I don't know if he does that because he knows I need it or just because he knows it'll be a gift, but it always is a gift. So I do think trying to like come up with ideas of things that will serve them, and hopefully that's how they hopefully that's what happens, but that has been such a gift to us.
Well, I think there's probably two reasons. One is like, I feel like I want you to have that. You don't get that very much. But also I think, as a man, like we're the steward of our family. We're the shepherd of our family.
Yes.
And ultimately, I know it's like your relationship with God, but I'm responsible for the spiritual climate of my home. And so I have to make sure that that's happening. All the people in my family are interacting with God, and that includes my wife. And so I think that's part of it. But I love what you said, Aaron, too, just about just praying and like getting before God on behalf of your family. That's the first step. Just like Megan started out this whole episode about is just prayer. The first step to about leading your family spiritually is on your knees every morning and you're praying. And that's where I start. That's where everyone needs to start, is just in prayer.
Yeah.
And I would even, the whole concept of like what Aaron said earlier too about you behave in the same way that of the person that you behold.
Yeah.
And if you're spending time with the Lord and you're spending time with Jesus, you're going to act like him. I love that. I love what you said, Aaron, about that. And that is so true. And it's like, you are going to behave like the people you're around.
Right.
You show me your friends and I'll show you your future. Yeah. But if Jesus is your best friend and you're hanging out with him all day, your house is going to be a place of love and worship and praise and glory and honor and all those beautiful things.
Right. A close friend of mine once said, if you're not intentionally being discipled by Jesus, you're unintentionally being discipled by the world.
Yeah.
So you have got to protect that time with him.
So true, man.
It's everything.
So true.
It's absolutely everything.
Yeah. A couple things too, just that I was thinking of is another way that we can lead our home spiritually is, I guess it kind of dovetails with the previous episode when we were talking about showing up at the table. Something that my wife and I do in the mornings is we have just around the breakfast table when we're sitting down eating breakfast. There's several things that we kind of go through in the morning as the kids are eating. We do a scripture memory. We do a worship song. We read a biography about a certain historical figure.
Love it.
That,
a missionary or
missionary, person of faith
or something.
That's kind of like kids language.
Kids version.
Kids version of those. And we do family proclamations. Everyone, we recite the family proclamations. We have like a list of 10 things that we all make sure we're saying, and those are great things to do.
Favorite missionary?
I mean, this is a good example of like
Smith Wigglesworth.
Whenever
revivalist.
He's not a missionary. Anyway,
he's a
revivalist.
He was a missionary to the U.S.
But we read his book.
Anyway, something. This is an area I feel like we've seen the way that you can like step in the gaps with each other, because like we have seen how when Ben leads that time, it is like much smoother and better. But there's been seasons where he hasn't wanted to step into that as much, and so instead of like resenting that, just being willing to, okay, well, like I'm doing that for now. And even like the lack of nag, I've learned this. Okay, so there was time where I would continually nag, but in the times that that happens, of just like stepping in and continuing to do it, and eventually he sees how, wow, this is really not going as well without me. So he's like, okay, and God always brings conviction, and he's like, okay, sorry, I'm sorry I haven't been doing this. I'll step back in.
Yes. True. There's often, I remember feeling that tension of, there was a season where Aaron was just pursuing some other things, and he was distracted, and he wasn't the man who, he was always the man you are in front of me now, but he's just distracted and making different life choices. And I remember feeling this tension, and maybe you do too, as you're listening, of, do I hold back and wait for them? Or like, can I keep living on and carrying on and like doing the things without them? And I think that question and that tension is birthed out of the sting of like, I don't want to do it without them. Like it'd be so beautiful to do it together. And it's like that all or nothing, like together or we're not doing it, and so if we can kind of recognize those things that are at play, and just, I had to make a decision at one point. I just got to keep going. I got to keep carrying on, and I'm going to continue to invite him.
Amen.
I'm not going to nag, because we've all been there, right? We know what that's like. I think it's Proverbs that talks all about it's better to do this than to have a nagging wife in the house. Better to live in a shack than have a nagging wife. It's like, oh God, help me. But there's that decision we have to make of, I'm going to not nag. I'm going to invite him in. I always wanted to invite him in, never from a place of guilt or trying to manipulate, the circumstances, but like, hey, you want to join me? Do you want to do this with us, or do you want to do this with me? And I would just keep pressing on. And then I think, you could speak more to what that does to you, but I think, like, oh, I was born for more. And as our spouses see the other living fully alive and not choosing to be distracted or whatever, it's an inspiration and and that conviction, that gap of what I want to do and what I am doing is just getting too big. And so at some point, someone's got to change.
Right. And I'm grateful too, because you never let me off the hook.
Right.
And I'm super grateful for that, because, earlier in this season, we talked about staying on mission and the importance of our mission. And, I'm not greater than our values. Like our values are pillars in our family. Right. It's like, nope, we're still going to church. Yeah. I know you're not into it, but we're going. Hun, you pray for the meal. Read this scripture to the kids. It's like, you're still doing these things. These are your roles. Yeah. You don't get to just say, check out. Yeah. So I was super grateful for that. I know it might not be for everybody, but it's, in hindsight, I'm like, wow, hun, like, I really appreciate that. Like you said, you just don't get to say no. I'm sorry, you just don't.
So good. So good, guys. Well, thank you so much for listening with the Showing Up series. We're talking about showing up, to lead your family spiritually when your spouse is struggling spiritually.
Yeah.
Stay tuned for the next episode in our Showing Up series. Thanks.